Willington was built around mining. That's how Willington came into being. And so it's really important that we remember that and we remember the mining history, because that's why Willington is.
You can't separate them. Willington's here because of mines. The mine was here, people came to work here, they needed somewhere to live. This is Willington.
This land is barren and broken, scarred like the face of the moon. Our tongue no longer spoken, the towns all around face ruin. Where there's a mine or a hole in the ground, that's where I'm headed for, that's where I'm bound. Look for me under the load, so follow me down, Cousin Jack. Come on, follow me down, Cousin Jack. Yeah, follow me down.
To modernise, the landscape of Willington, Sunnybrow, Hunwick and Oakenshaw in County Durham shows little sign of the industry that was once everything. The mines are long gone, the residents have evolved, and the story of what built and once dominated these communities is covered in a layer of dust. On a stunningly bright Saturday, the last day of June 2018, the MAN engine came to town. A metal behemoth specifically designed to wipe away that dust and reawaken the collective memory. Travelling to Willington from Cornwall, as hundreds of miners through history had done, the MAN engine shared a story that is familiar to so many places across the country where families once worked the ground.
Real people with real mining stories, telling the real tales of real lives.
The story of the Willington area begins with a riddle. Willington Colliery was actually in Sunnybrow, and the colliery in Willington was named after nearby Branspeth.
It's a long story, but I think originally the land was owned by Branspeth Castle estate, and the pit was opened within the estate, so it got the name Branspeth Colliery. Willington was built, and then other smaller pits came up that were connected to the mother pit, you might say, Branspeth Colliery. And we had Branspeth Pit, there was pits at Oakenshaw, there were pits all around this area, but they were connected to the one mother pit, you might say, in terms of Branspeth.
Branspeth pit was opened here in Willington, but Willington then was part of the Branspeth estate, and so that's why it took the name Branspeth. And when the Willington pit opened at Sunnybrow, Sunnybrow really wasn't a huge place, and so it was part of Willington basically, and that's why it's called Willington.
A familiar story in mining history is that the landowner would grant the mineral rights to their land to a third party. That third party would then build the pits and organise working the ground, whilst paying rent and a percentage of profits to the landowner. In Willington's case, the lord of the manor in Branspeth Castle could sit back while the partnership of Straker and Love managed the nitty-gritty.
Well, they took on the mineral rights for this area, and they were businessmen, and they weren't from the area, but they saw this as their opportunity to make money. They were very, very harsh in the way that they treated their labourers. The conditions back in the 1850s, 1860s, it was tantamount to slave labour that many people were working in.
If you can imagine that they relied very much upon the mine owners for work, their wages were quite low, poor. They were living in houses that were owned by the mine owners. So not only were their wages dependent upon the mine owners, but where they lived depended upon the mine owners as well. Just about everything they did depended upon the mine owners. They were governed by the mine owners.
Despite the harsh working conditions and the stranglehold that Straker and Love had on their employees, Joseph Love in particular ruled with an iron will, dictating everything from wages to religion. The draw of the Durham coalfield was strong. Men and their families travelled to the area from near and far in search of work.
It's boom time, it's the Wild West, it's our Klondike, you might say. People come from all over the place to work here. A lot of people came up from Cornwall. I think there'd been an economic downturn in the tin mines down there. A lot of people came over from Ireland. They had the famine over there, and they were over here looking for work.
And I think there was always sort of a movement of miners around the United Kingdom, basically. They came here for jobs, for work, and they found it.
People came from lead mines even closer to home up in Weardale. It was a real case, there was money to be made here, and there was work, and they came here for that.
The team behind the Man engine have been following in the footsteps of those that came from Cornwall to labour underground. Stopping at significant sites across the country, they've reawakened a sense of shared identity that belongs to all areas where Cornish families travelled in search of work.
Got this incredible diaspora. We call them the Cousin Jacks. The Cousin Jacks were the Cornish miners who went to South Australia, they went to Mexico and Chile, we got 177 locations they went, including Durham. And right here in Willington, we know Cornish miners came here. When the Cousin Jacks spread out around the globe, they didn't just take their industry and their know-how and the mining technology, they also took songs, Agan Tavis Nai, our language, they took rugby, they took our pasties, and it's wonderful to be following some of those stories.
Where there's a mine or a hole in the ground, that's where I'm headed for, that's where I'm bound. Look for me under the load or inside the vein. Where the copper and the glory and the arsenic and tin, running on the run to get under your skin. I'm leaving the county behind, I'm not coming back. So follow me down, Cousin Jack.
The mine owners of 150 plus years ago needed a workforce, and so needed to attract men and their families to their particular pits. The offer of pay and accommodation was enticing, but in reality there was little incentive for the managers to spend more than absolutely necessary. Housing was Spartan.
I've thought about this coming from the area, and of course over the years having attended the Durham Miners Gala, which is an important legacy here, and I want to mention that because that's a huge legacy, and it's a celebration of the mining community. But I've thought about trying to put myself in their shoes. It's impossible. I mean, it must have been unbearable, and day after day after day, shift after shift after shift, there they were, going down the pit, working in the most horrendous conditions, hewing and picking and lying on their backs, not able to stand up, hot, sweaty, working in almost complete darkness. I find that almost impossible to imagine.
Some of the big shovels were like Hardship. basically round. And if they went in with the wrong way, you couldn't clean it out. You couldn't turn it over.
A disparate community made up of immigrants from Ireland, Cornwall, Scotland and elsewhere. People rubbed along as best they could. The town of Willington had 216 occupants in 1831, mostly involved in agricultural work. By 1861, it had over 2,000, and by 1900, over 5,000. The various migrant groups did fall out with each other on occasion, but despite their cultural differences, they had literal common ground in the pits that they all worked. This bond was galvanised in the 1860s when the mine owners sought to eke out even more profit from their workforce.
There was a really sort of important strike in the history of this town, but also in the history of the overall country and the labour movement generally, and the Rocking Tub strike of 1863, which was a big deal really, because it was one of the first times when actually people stood together and said, enough of this, we need to do something about it. It lasted for over a year, as these things never do, they never end well, but it really sort of was the first time when people thought that, you know what, if we stick together, stand together, we might achieve something. And I think within 10 years of that, there were changes in terms of how coal was weighed and how money was paid to them. And there were changes that lasted for a long time. Imagine you're underground, you're hewing coal, you fill your tub, and then it goes back on the rails, the ponies may be pulling it back out to a banksman who would get the coal and say, yeah, that's okay, you'll get paid for that. But the problem was, because the pits were very low in Willington, the seams at the heights were it's only 18 inches they got down to, that when the coal was going out in the tubs, it was actually sinking down in the tubs. And it meant that when it got out to the banksman at the end, they actually didn't get paid unless it was full. So basically a man could be working there for hours filling the tub by hand, sends it out and he doesn't get paid for it. It was called the rocking tub because what the miners used to do is underground, they would rock the tubs to actually make the coal settle, so they would get paid when it went out. But that obviously took time off them in terms of when they should be hewing coal and earning money. But it was a real sort of a nasty strike. There were evictions took place, essentially starvation took place in the area. But it got to the point where a lot of people actually at that point decided to move. I know a lot of the Irish community, they decided to move to America and they went en masse around that time as a result of the strike.
My dad told me there was a bloke in our village who, when they transported 300 or so miners up here in one lump, they got here and discovered they'd been pulled in as blacklegs and that they were in as strikebreakers. He had no idea. He just said no, turned around, walked home.
During the Rocking strike, Strakenlove had such a stranglehold over the town, they put pressure on the tradesmen in the place not to give any credit whatsoever to the miners that were on strike. So they had total control of the area. And it was it was a situation where the people of the town, there was no empowerment for them at all to do anything. But they realised that sort of if they did stick together, the only power they had was to withdraw their labour. And there was Strakenlove, they tried convictions of these people, they took them to court, it was thrown out. But it really sort of made people realise we could change something if we stick together and do it together. And that Rocking strike is really one of the points where a lot of the trade union movement really kind of started and got galvanised with, and it's important that we remember that.
The history of the County Durham coalfield is littered with incident, accident and disaster.
When you look at the history, you see that so many miners died in explosions or various other accidents. And the explosion here at Bransford on the 13th of April, around about 10 p.m. 1896, when 20 men and boys lost their lives. And families were devastated. They were sons, fathers, brothers, cousins, nephews. And 20 men didn't come back up from that shift. And you just can't imagine how that must have felt at the time. And in some families, they lost more than one family member. I still cannot put myself in their shoes. I've no idea how dreadful it must have been facing that every day.
The inquiry after the disaster came to the conclusion that a shot of explosive had misfired and ignited coal dust. Of the 20 men and boys killed, not all died in the explosion. Some were slowly suffocated by the carbon monoxide fumes that followed the blast.
Sing from the chamber to the grave. I hear the dying miners sing, a sound of melody I crave upon my burial day.
13th of April, 1896, Brancepeth Colliery. An explosion ripped through the ways, 20 men and boys killed.
Sing sweetly as you
Joseph Brigham,
travel on,
Thomas Carling,
and keep
William Cook, John R.
slow.
Dawson, Joseph.
On that bright summer's day in 2018, the community of Willington and thousands of others gathered together near the former site of Brancepeth Pit to remember all who had gone before, all who had trod the very same ground, and to celebrate a shared inheritance.
What it's about really is it's remembering why this place is here. That's the spirit. It's a 12-metre tall spirit of mining that's saying to people, this town is here because of mining.
When we got this opportunity and we said, come and talk to us, Northern Heartlands, and I've got to say I was absolutely blown away by the enthusiasm of Jill Cole from Northern Heartlands for this as the venue. Really, really, this is the place to do it.
I think the Man Engine is really a representation of mining heritage across the whole country. He's from Cornwall. He was originally built to represent Cornish miners, but it very quickly became evident that actually miners everywhere are connected, that mining heritage is something that belongs to everybody. And here in Durham, in County Durham, part of the Durham coalfield, the largest coalfield, it is hugely significant, and it seemed really the right thing to do to try and get the Man Engine to come to Durham when the opportunity arose.
The spectacle is perhaps the easiest bit to achieve. You know, you build this huge, enormous thing that blows people's brains away. I always said, he's not going to be an inch lower than 40 foot. He's got to be up there, otherwise he won't have that visual impact. But what I'm proud of is the way we've layered the meaning. So people are going, I want to understand the technology of how that works. I want to understand the historical reference in that. Actually, oh, I'm now feeling something really quite emotional. And we've got tough ex-miners coming up to us with tears in their eyes, thanking us because they feel that their endeavour has been recognised in a way that perhaps previously they might have felt just a little bit brushed under the carpet and not given that dignity that we hope we're giving them. We always said the Man Engine is a heritage project about the future. It's a delight to us to come to these real mining places where real people have got real stories. It's not a Disneyfication, it's not a rose-tinted nostalgification. And people seem to understand that we're taking our hats off to the past, but our coats off to the future.
This land is barren and broken, scarred like the face of the moon. Our tongue no longer spoken, the towns all around face ruin. Will there be work in New Brunswick, or will I find gold in the Cape? If I tunnel way down to Australia, how will I ever escape?